The wind came howling down from the high plains, like it had a bone to pick, with every soul still breathing, rattling the loose boards of the widow Maeve Hollister's porch and pushing snow into the corners where last year's hopes had already died. Christmas Eve was settling in hard and mean, and Maeve stood at her window with hands folded tight, whispering a prayer she had spoken every night since her husband was laid in the frozen ground, asking for strength, not joy, not miracles, just enough strength to wake up and keep going in a world that felt wider and lonelier than the prairie itself. Maeve had learned early that grief did not leave clean tracks. It lingered like smoke after a prairie fire, sinking into clothes, walls, even breath. The ranch house her husband built now felt too big for one woman and too quiet for a holiday meant to ring with laughter. She moved through the rooms, lighting a single candle, her boots soft on the floorboards, memories rising up with every step, his laugh, his voice, the way he tipped his hat when he came in from the cold. And with each memory her prayer grew heavier. Outside of Cedar Ridge, where the land rolled endless and unforgiving, a lone rider pushed his horse through the gathering dusk. Caleb Rourke carried his own ghosts in his saddlebags. His coat was worn thin from years of hard weather and harder choices. The rancher had no taste for Christmas cheer. The season reminded him too much of the fire that took his family and the silence that followed. Yet something pulled him onward toward the lights of town, a feeling he could not name but could not ignore. Caleb's horse snorted as they crossed the frozen creek, ice cracking beneath iron shoes. The sound echoed like a gunshot and made him flinch. Grief had taught him to expect pain even in quiet moments. He tightened his grip on the reins and pushed forward, thinking of the letter folded deep in his pocket, a notice about cattle wintering on the far range, business that could not wait, even on Christmas Eve. And yet he found himself slowing as he neared a small ranch house half buried in snow. Maeve heard the hoofbeats before she saw the rider, the steady rhythm cutting through the wind. Her heart jumped with fear and hope tangled together. Visitors were rare and trouble more common than kindness these days. She wrapped her shawl tighter and opened the door just enough to peer out. Lantern lights spilling across the snow, revealing a tall man in a battered hat. His shoulders slumped like the weight of the sky rested there. And in that instant she felt her prayer shift. As if it had been heard, Caleb tipped his hat when he saw her, a habit he could not break, his voice rough from cold and disuse, as he asked for directions and maybe a place to warm up his hands. Just for a minute, Maeve studied his face, the lines carved deep by loss she recognized all too well. Something in her softened, loneliness answering loneliness. She nodded and stepped aside, the door creaking open wider, inviting not just a man, but a possibility she had not dared imagine inside. The warmth hit Caleb like a memory he had forgotten he owned, the smell of wood smoke and simple food, the quiet hum of a home still breathing. Maeve poured him coffee with shaking hands and apologized for the thin fare. He shook his head and thanked her like the gift was something precious. They sat across from each other at the small table, strangers bound by silence, the storm outside pressing close, and for the first time in years Caleb felt the edge of his grief dull just a notch. They did not speak of their losses that night. Words felt too sharp, but something passed between them in the quiet, an understanding forged without sound. Maeve looked at the candle flame and felt a warmth deeper than the fire. Her prayer for strength had not been answered with thunder or angels, but with a weary rancher carrying his own sorrow. And as the wind howled beyond the walls, two broken souls found shelter under one roof. Unaware that this Christmas Eve was only the beginning, morning crept into the ranch house, slow and pale, the kind of dawn that felt careful not to disturb the grief sleeping in every corner. Maeve woke before the light fully broke, listening to the wind ease off and the strange sound of another person breathing under her roof. For a moment she felt the old instinct to pull back, to retreat into solitude where pain at least felt familiar. Yet when she rose and moved toward the kitchen, she found Caleb already awake, sitting at the table with his hat in his hands, like a man in church, staring into the cold ashes of the stove. And something about that sight settled her nerves. As if sorrow shared was less likely to turn wild, they spoke more freely with the coming of day, not rushing words but letting them find their own pace. Caleb told her of the Rourke spread out west of the ridge, of cattle thinned by drought and winter storms, of long rides where the only sound was wind and memory. Maeve listened without interrupting, her eyes kind but steady, and when she spoke of her husband, of the fever that took him before spring could promise anything better, Caleb did not offer pity, he offered understanding. the rare kind that does not try to mend what cannot be mended, only sits beside it. By midday the sun cut through the clouds like a blade, sharp and cold but bright enough to call a man outside. Caleb offered to help Maeve with chores, not out of obligation but because stillness had a way of letting his thoughts grow too loud. They worked side by side, mending a loose fence rail and hauling firewood, their breaths rising in white clouds, hands numbed by cold and effort. Yet the labor felt good, honest, and with every shared task Maeve felt a small piece of her strength return, not borrowed, but awakened. The land itself seemed to take notice. Snow glittered across the fields, and the sky stretched wide and blue, the kind of sky that reminded folks why they stayed, despite hardship. Caleb paused at the edge of the pasture and spoke quietly about his family, about a Christmas long ago when laughter filled his house and the future seemed sturdy. His voice faltered only once, and Maeve reached out, resting her gloved hand on his arm, the gesture simple but grounding. Like an anchor dropped in deep water. That evening they shared a modest Christmas meal, the table set with care that felt almost ceremonial. Maeve had not cooked like this since before her husband's passing, and Caleb ate with a gratitude that went beyond hunger. The conversation drifted toward practical matters, the coming winter, the need for help on ranches both small and large, and in that talk lay unspoken questions about staying, about leaving, about whether two broken paths might run alongside each other without losing their way. Caleb confessed the rest of his journey then, the reason he rode out on Christmas Eve despite the weather, a dispute over grazing rights that threatened to turn ugly, old grudges flaring like dry grass. He admitted he was tired of fighting alone, tired of carrying grief as if it were proof of strength. Maeve listened and felt her heart pull in two directions, fear of more loss battling a growing sense of purpose. She had prayed for strength, but strength, she was learning, often came with choices that demanded courage. Night settled again, quieter than the one before, the storm spent and the stars sharp overhead. Caleb stood on the porch readying his horse, duty calling him onward. Maeve watched with a heaviness she did not try to hide. Their connection felt fragile yet real, like a fire kindled from scarce wood. Neither spoke of promises, but when Caleb said he would return once matters were settled, the words carried weight, and Maeve surprised herself by believing them as Caleb rode off beneath the cold stars. Maeve remained on the porch, her breath steady, her heart still aching but no longer hollow. She understood now that her prayer had been answered in layers, not all at once. The strength she sought was growing through work, through truth, through the willingness to open her door to another soul marked by loss. And somewhere out on the darkened trail, Caleb carried with him the quiet hope that Christmas had given him more than a passing shelter. It had given him a reason to come back. Winter tightened its grip after Caleb rode away, days folding into weeks marked by frost and routine. Yet Maeve felt different moving through them, as if the house itself had remembered how to breathe. She rose each morning with purpose, tending stock, fixing what had long been ignored, drawing strength from the memory of shared labor and honest words. And though loneliness still came calling at dusk, it no longer ruled her, because somewhere beyond the ridge a rancher carried a promise shaped not by romance, but by respect and shared endurance. Trouble found Cedar Ridge before Caleb did. The grazing dispute he had spoken of spilled over into town. Harsh words turned into threats, and the fragile peace of the range trembled. Maeve heard the talk in the general store, men choosing sides, fear riding alongside pride, and she understood then the cost of the path Caleb walked. Each night she lit a candle and prayed again, not just for herself but for his safe return. The prayer, stronger now, steadied by action rather than despair. When Caleb finally came back, he arrived under a sky bruised with sunset, his horse tired but sound, his face worn yet resolute. The conflict had ended without blood, but not without sacrifice. Fences burned, trust tested, and Caleb had learned the weight of standing firm without standing alone. Maeve met him at the gate, her smile cautious yet genuine, and in that moment both understood how much had changed without a single word needing to be spoken. They walked the land together as they once had, discussing repairs, planning ahead for spring, their steps matching easy and natural. Caleb spoke of needing a place to rest his herd through winter, and Maeve offered pasture without hesitation, not as charity but as partnership. The arrangement simple yet meaningful, two ranchers leaning on each other in a season that demanded cooperation. And in that shared purpose something deeper took root. Evenings grew warmer in spirit, if not in temperature. Conversation filled the house again, laughter tentative at first, then freer. Caleb fixed what was broken, not just boards and hinges, but the sense of abandonment Maeve had carried. And Maeve in turn offered something he had not known he needed, a home that did not ask him to forget his past in order to belong. Their griefs remained honored rather than erased, shaping a bond built on truth rather than escape as Christmas approached once more. The house stood brighter, not from decorations alone but from life restored. Neighbors stopped by, drawn by the sight of light in the windows and cattle safe in the fields. Maeve hosted without fear, her strength evident in every gesture, and Caleb watched her with quiet pride, knowing her prayer had grown into something shared, something enduring on Christmas Eve, beneath the same stars that once watched him ride away. Caleb spoke plainly, offering no grand vows, only commitment forged through hardship. He asked Maeve if she would walk the coming years beside him, not as a rescuer or a refuge, but as an equal. Maeve answered with tears and a steady voice, saying yes, not because she feared being alone, but because she was no longer afraid to choose connection. The wind still howled across Cedar Ridge, the land remained wild and unforgiving, but within the ranch house warmth held fast. The widow's prayer for strength had been answered in the most honest way possible, through shared work, shared grief, and shared hope. And as dawn broke on Christmas morning, two souls who had known loss stood ready for whatever the range might bring. Together,